Russian President Vladimir Putin is scheduled to host China's foreign minister in Moscow later on Tuesday. Wang Yi is also set to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The two countries have strengthened ties in recent years. The war on Ukraine will likely top the agenda. Yulia Shapovalova is in Moscow for a little bit more detail on that. So what's the purpose of this visit, Yulia?
Well, that's right. And next hour at 8 GMT, he's holding negotiations with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. And the Kremlin, as you mentioned, has also confirmed that President Putin might meet with Wang Yi later on during his 3-day visit to Moscow, but no details on our end right now. Just recently, the Chinese Foreign Minister gave a very detailed interview to RIA Novosti, Russia's state news agency, where he explained in detail Beijing's position on the Ukrainian settlement. He acknowledged that the situation on the battlefield in Ukraine was difficult. The warring parties' positions on key issues currently greatly diverge, and the path to peace is still far away. But despite that, Beijing calls for the continuation of the peace talks. Russia and the United States have achieved certain results. He called them a small step, but quite constructive. And he also commented on a number of other pressing issues, like China will deepen cooperation with Russia within the frame of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and BRICS in order to further develop the global south. Talking about relations between Russia and the United States, the idea that Trump supports Russia in order to confront China is not a good idea, according to Wang Yi, as well as imposing or increasing tariffs on goods from China. It's unfair, it damages global markets and harms the reputation of the United States. And if the United States does not stop economic pressure on China, Beijing will respond in the most decisive way. And he also said that the United States should stop taking steps that undermine strategic security, in particular weaken the role of nuclear weapons in its own national security policy, stop creating nuclear alliances, and not deploy medium-range missiles near the borders of other states. And just very briefly about Taiwan, he said that the return of Taiwan to China is an important result of World War II because Taiwan is part of China. So, of course, we're following this visit here in Moscow, and, of course, we'll bring more as soon as we get that information.
Okay, Yulia Shapovalova reporting from Moscow. Thank you, Yulia. Let's bring in Huyao Wang, president of the Chinese think tank, the Center for China and Globalization. You're joining us from Beijing. Thank you for your time. So Moscow and Beijing declared a couple of years ago, just before the Ukraine war, a, quote, no limits partnership. What does China get out of that partnership?
Well, I think that China and Russia enjoys the longest border in the world. You know, they have over 4,000 kilometers long, the bordering common borders, and Russia and China has actually two also nuclear powers, and then they actually economically are quite a bit of intertwined in recent years. I think that a few years ago, when they said the friendship is no limit or cooperation no limit, that's just a diplomatic term that China used with many other countries. And of course, China said that with Africa, with Latin America. So friendship is everlasting and sky's the limit. I mean, that language is a diplomatic language China is using all the time. But I do think that because of this conflict in Ukraine, that really, because of economically sanctioned by Western countries, Russian economy does depend more on China's trade now. For example, Russian GDP achieved 4.1% in 2024. That's remarkable, given that kind of economic sanction situation. So I think normal trade, normal activities, normal cooperation, China and Russia will conduct. But China, of course, would like to play a more active role in promoting peace and even working with the international community, with other global South countries, India, Brazil, and South Africa.
Okay, so pause there for a second there. If China wants to play a more active role in, as you say, promoting peace, it does say that in the case of the Ukraine-Russia war, it's ready to play what it calls a constructive role. So that's in line with what you just told us. But it has in the past floated a peace plan that was immediately rejected by Ukraine because it essentially sided with Russia. It was very favorable to Moscow. So what role, really, do you see for China here?
No, I think China plays a huge role, a very important role. As a matter of fact, I think you talk about over a year, 2 years ago, a year ago, China proposed a 12-point peace plan, which is so strong, condemn using nuclear powers, safeguard humanitarian passages, and all those sovereignty, territorial integrity. Basically, it has all the points that the Western countries want. So, and not only that, China actually worked with countries like Brazil and South Africa and Friends of Peace at the UN. And what I think the role of China would play is that now U.S. president has said very clearly, U.S. will not put boots on the ground, will not send soldiers to these peacekeeping efforts, or we only want European troops and non-European troops. So, if it's non-European troops, I think, let's go back to the UN, and where UN peacekeeping force can be made of France, Germany, Italy, or UK, but also India, Brazil, China. China is the largest peace-sending country among P5 member countries. So this UN peacekeeping force probably is the best solution to safeguard this conflict and make sure not only guarantee from NATO, from EU, US, but also from countries like China, India, South Africa, Brazil, so that we have a bridge country guarantee. So this is more acceptable on both sides.
Okay, so you see a plausible scenario where China sends soldiers to Ukraine as a peacekeeping force or a ceasefire observation force. One more thing. There's been speculation that one reason the U.S. recently has been more conciliatory towards Russia is that Donald Trump specifically wants to pry Russia away from China, weaken the China-Russia axis. Do you see it that way?
No, I don't see that happen at all, because the divide between Russia and the West countries has been in the last 80 years. That's since basically the Second World War, and then of course this Ukraine war in the last 3 years has deepened the crisis, deepened the mistrust and divide between Russia and the West, and also in the last several years the Russia's dependency on China is getting even more so. As I mentioned, they got 4.5% GDP growth, largely thanks to China's trade. So I think, the mistrust is there so deep, it will not eliminate in the next 5-10 years. And then their dependency on China is so much now, it will going to continue to do that in order to survive economically. So I don't think that this kind of short-term strategy of cozy with the U.S. and then aiming at China is just wishful thinking. I don't think in reality it's very difficult to have, and also China is working with U.S., with the EU, and have very stable relations, actually normal trade relations too, with those big countries, particularly with the EU. So I think that we are not talking about West against the rest or West against China. We should talk about a multipolar world, and certainly China and Russia and U.S. and EU are multiple polos, as defined by the Munich Security Conference, where I attended in February just this month.
All right, Huya Wang, thank you very much for joining us on the Al Jazeera NewsHour.